What's the volume like? Volume.
Is it low?
I think so. Check. Hi, good morning. Good to see you guys here. Sorry for starting a bit late. We were setting some stuff up because we got a lot of requests to stream this, so we had to put this together quickly. My name is Sanusi Smaila. I work at Colab, and today we're talking about the future of work. So you guys look very confused. Are we okay? Is it a good day? Yes? Awesome. Is this something we're interested in? We can gist if you want to gist. I'm always, I like gist. But future of work sounds interesting, something we want to talk about, right? Okay. So future of work, what does it mean? I think the first thing to say is that all of this is my opinion, right? It's not law, it's not science in some cases. I don't even have the data, but it's just stuff that I feel strongly about. So every bit of information that you get, it's useful to take it within the context of your own life, and as they say in crypto spaces, do your own research, right? So let me start by telling you a story, or two stories that sort of explain or show how important this kind of talks can be. A bunch of years ago, I worked at MTN, and my dad at the time used to work in Abuja, but he came home every weekend. But it was funny that even though he was home every weekend, sometimes in 1 month, we would see just once or twice. Because he'll come back on a Friday evening and I'll still be at work. I'll come back after he had gone to bed. By the time he's up on Saturday morning, I'm probably still at work. I've gone back to work. Probably would come back when he was asleep. And then, sometimes on Sundays I was at work as well. And, so he could do the whole weekend. He would leave before I come back. So one of these, one weekend, I think it was a Saturday or a Sunday, I came back from work, and in the evening, say around 6 o'clock, and he was sitting down outside reading a newspaper. And, I got out of the car, and he's like, I greeted him, he's like, how are you? Fine. He's like, oh, I'm not seeing you in a while, so how's work? I told him it was fine. And then he started asking me more about work. So how's it going? What do you think your prospects are? Is there sort of like a trajectory that you see yourself? And we had all this. He was just asking, what seemed like a lot of innocent questions, and obviously, I was giving him answers. And he said a few things that altered the trajectory of my life in that conversation. One of the things that he said, eventually was that I don't think, given all you said, I'm not satisfied. I don't think that you're getting value from the work that you're putting in. Just ignore the guys with the chairs and focus on me. I don't think you're getting like a lot of value. When I was your age, or when I was much younger, we worked really hard. That was my dad talking. We worked really hard, but we got the benefits of the work that we put in. For example, my dad worked in the civil service all his life, well, public/civil service. He was a lecturer for a while, and he was like, he started building a house when he was serving with the money he was being paid as a copper, but he never really lived in a house that the government didn't pay for until he retired. So those were one of the things. They worked really hard. My dad works hard, like you could tell even today. But that they got the benefits. Obviously, they also got like the consequences of that, with all the funny blood pressure or low sugar or high sugar things that they picked up during their time. But his point was that he felt, and he said that if I woke up every day and left the house as early as I did every day, and I went out to sell pure water, and then I came back at the time that I came back, that I probably would make more money than what I was being paid at the time, which he didn't know, by the way. Like, he didn't know how much I was being paid, but he was just... And the point that he was trying to illustrate to me, and he actually did say this, was that the world had changed to a large extent from the type of work or the type of stuff I was doing at the time, not in terms of technical quality, but in terms of the structure of work by itself. And as a result, he felt like I was not applying myself as best as I should be. He didn't advise me to quit my job, but I quit my job on my next birthday. And that conversation basically has led me to this point where I'm sitting in front of you talking at Colab. But the point is that the conversation, was a simple conversation, but it actually did alter the way that I thought about life. Like, a lot of things that I thought were normal, or like the trajectory I thought my life was on, seemed very fine at the time. I was living the good life. Empty and big boy. But just the conversation sort of altered trajectory. Like, it made me think again. And I'm hoping that the conversation that we have today has this sort of similar effect to you, in the sense that, the point of it is just to take you out of the bubble that you live in a bit, to see things in a different context, and then maybe think about, what you're doing. So the first thing, so that's the story. There's another one, but I'll skip it because I'm not so good at telling stories, as you can tell. So the first thing is this, right? Like, to set the context, change is constant. We're always changing, right? Even as human beings, the number of, say, cells that you had when you walked into this room and the number of cells that you have now, even if you're not aware, are not the same anymore. They've either reduced or increased. So change is constant, and the world is constantly changing. In as much as human beings, we don't like change is inevitable. So it's stuff that we need to be cognizant about. But the other thing about change, besides the fact that it's not bad, is that it's always happening. Meaning, as you sit, it's happening. Sometimes it happens in very small bits, so you're not able to see it in the moment. If you go back to my story, I wasn't able to see outside the fact that I would wake up in the morning, go to work, come back late, sleep, wake up next morning, and work was fun. I enjoyed what I was doing. And do that circle for 30 days and get paid. And the little time I had between home and work, I would go to, there's a place called MI, it's no longer open, but it's in Bernard here. And then, for context, I used to live in Rigachukwu or around there. I would drive down and come and sit down in MI, watch football, make noise with my friends. Like, life seemed good. But it was just this hamster wheel, every day doing the same thing and sort of enjoying yourself. And if I wasn't sort of shifted from that trajectory, I may still have been doing that today. Because everything seemed fine, but what was really happening was I was so busy running on this hamster wheel that I wasn't able to look up and look anywhere else. So change isn't necessarily bad, and the world is changing, but more than ever, I think, and this is my personal opinion again, I think that the world is changing, or has changed even a lot more in the past few years. I think that, since maybe the late 70s till date, I think, and the reason why I think this might just be the fact that maybe we record stuff a bit more, so there's more in our collective memory today than past generations had access to. But I think that the amount of change that has happened between the 70s and today has been crazy. If you think about it, I'm not that old, but I grew up in a house where primarily the way we listened to stored music was on this black, what they call, I don't even know what they're called these days, vinyl discs. And we went from that to cassettes. So people are looking at me like, what are those? From that to CDs. In between, we used this cartridge-like thing. And then, there was stuff like the iPod where we stored music. Now we store music on our phones. These days we don't even store music, we stream, right? Yeah. All of that has happened in this really short time. So the world is changing, and a lot of those changes are much bigger than we are aware of. I'll give you an example. So, how many people know what Voltron is? Voltron, I just need to know, like, sure, wave your hands. Voltron, yeah, defend out the universe, yeah, okay. Quite a number of people. And obviously the older people. But how many people know what Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is? Just one person, okay. How many people know what Rainbow Ruby is? Just one person. Two people. Okay. Now, those shows, by the way, besides Voltron, like Daniel Tiger Neighborhood, there was a time where my daughter, that was the only thing she was watching. Now, Rainbow Ruby is hot on her rotation. But the point I'm trying to illustrate from those examples is, if you are anywhere near my age, you would realize that we sort of lived a collective life. So for people my age, we came back from school, we did our assignment. 4 o'clock was when TV stations started, like when they woke up. And they would do Voltron or Thunderstorm, and everybody could relate. So at least for me, I would finish Voltron, Thunderstorm. I had lesson, and then I'd go and play football or basketball. It was a constant circle. But the thing about it is, all of us in lesson, like a whole class, and after school, we're talking about like the Voltron episode we just watched, or Thunderstorm, or and then we go to the field as well. And while we're playing football or basketball, we're talking about that. So what it meant was everybody around my age in my estate or street sort of had similar interests. We lived in this sort of shared life. Today, my daughter likes Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and I've asked this in an audience of parents that was maybe 7 times this size now, and only one other parent's daughter was watch Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. What's happening, or what I'm using that to illustrate, is just one, that the fact that location as we used to know it is no longer as important as it was back in the day. There are people here in this room, even though I don't know, I'm guessing, or people here that are watching this, that are more in touch with the war in Ukraine than the banditry that happens in Kaduna. Right? And that's because location is, or because the internet has helped us disperse in a sense, you're able to form communities in a sense that are not location bound. If you wanted to say aggregate people around your interests or your interests today, they probably wouldn't necessarily be people who are your neighbors. It's a chance you don't even know your neighbors today. She doesn't know her neighbors. But if you were to go on the internet, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, somewhere, and say, I like, I don't know, mice, something, you'd find like millions of people who aggregate around that interest. Now, the point of all of this is one of the changes that's happened is that location isn't as relevant as it used to be. And we don't feel as bound to our location as we used to a couple of years ago as human beings. The second thing that is happening, and I won't spend a lot of time on this because we're in that everyone is hearing or interacting with crypto in one way or the other today. But it's also that people don't trust fiat money or money, the money that we know as much as we used to. Back in the day, let me just do a real quick history of money. So, money as we know it today used to be pegged to something, right? It was evidence that you had some value. So, just to skip a couple of years, the dollar used to be pegged to gold. So a dollar meant you had a certain amount of gold. And then at some point, it stopped being pegged to anything. It was just government authority, meaning the government is saying that you're good for this amount of value when you have that note. But what has happened is people have obviously realized that the same government who is promising that value can overnight devalue what they've given that value. So they can wake up and print dollars, for instance. This part is boring, so I'll skip it. But let's just know that fiat isn't as relevant, and all of this will make sense in a bit. We know, again, this is very obvious, but traditional media is no longer as relevant as it used to be. When I was growing up, NTA 9 o'clock was like a given. Like, that's how you knew what was happening in the world. Today, I don't even think I've seen NTA in like 15 years. If anybody from NTA is watching, sorry. To be honest, I don't, back then I could tell you like the newscasters, the Cyril Stover and all. I don't know anybody who, Virginia Abu. There are a bunch of them that are very popular. Franco Lise. I can't tell you anyone who works at NTA today. So we don't, and then there's also another thing that has changed is, we don't trust, or the trust in central authority has weakened, right? And again, this is something that is not very obvious, but if you think about the first thing you want to do when somebody annoys you or when you're upset, then it becomes obvious. Back then, the first sort of thing that you would gravitate towards if you had something that needed to be redressed was a figure of authority. That could be your dad, your mom, a chief, or somebody, your uncle, some older person, someone who you felt could get both parties settled. Today, at the first sight of offense, we don't even complain to authority anymore. We go to Twitter. We go to complain to our peers, because you have more trust in the judgment or in the validation of your peers versus central authority. Does that make sense, or am I just making this up? Okay. I might be making it up, it's fine. So there's that, and then there's the fact that the world is hyper-connected, and that hyperconnection means, like I said earlier, one of my examples that people are more distributed, interests are more distributed across the world, and we feel connected to people we've never met in different places in ways that used to be synonymous with people that were around you. Like I said, today you may not know your neighbor, but your best friend might live 12 hours away and you've never seen the person live. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. None of this is bad. You have the advances in AI and automation as well, that are changing the way things are done. And then we have something like COVID that came and accelerated a lot of these things. 3, 4, 5 years ago, Yusuf is not here, but I remember Yusuf, were again at a place like this, and he was like, he didn't understand how I worked, because he would come to my office then or come to my house and just see me in front of a laptop with nobody, and it didn't make sense to him. But now that's how everybody works, right? So COVID has accelerated all of this, and so what does, in all these things that I've said, these are changes, and these aren't exhaustive, but these are things that have changed in monumental ways, but sometimes we're not even aware, because the change happens really incrementally, so we just adapt. But if you zoom out, or you look back, you can see by how much things have changed. And some of these things aren't even really far. I mean, a couple of years ago, if you wanted to load your phone, if you wanted to buy credit on your phone, you bought a scratch card. The last time I bought a scratch card, and I bought it for someone, I had to go back because I thought they had duped me. Because apparently because it was empty, and for that particular type of scratch card, you don't even use star 555, you use star something. I had no idea. So I went there and I'm like, hey, you sold me, and he now showed me. Most people don't. I mean, maybe, I don't know how young some people are, but you may not even know what a 1.5 MTN recharge card looks like. Right? When it was a card that looked like an ATM that you scratched, and yeah. And so these things I'm talking about aren't so long ago, but they've changed, and things are changing. And because the world is changing, you really don't, ideally you shouldn't be stagnant, because you should also, be moving. So these changes have happened, and how do they affect work, or how will they affect work in the future? I think there are a bunch of things. Some of them are already happening now, but I think that over time we would see these things happen. And again, and I'm going to keep saying this, these are my own views. These are, not science, so we don't need to agree on them. But I think, I'll run through a couple of things. I think at first, work as we know it is always going to be, going forward, is going to be more distributed than it is today. A lot of that distribution is happening already. Today we have people in this building that work for companies in Europe, companies in the US, and it's going to increasingly happen. The idea that you'd have to physically go to a particular building and congregate with your colleagues is I think going to disappear increasingly as we go on. It may never fully go, but I think that the idea is going to weaken by a lot. So that's like one of the first things. I think secondly, because of that distribution, work is increasingly going to be more open and transparent, meaning today, or let me not use today, maybe a few years ago, like you could work in a very large organization but only know about the thing that you did day to day and not necessarily know what another department did. I think increasingly that's going to change. Because of distributed nature, you need to know a lot more. So I think companies would be more open and transparent. This one might be a bit controversial, but I think that work in the future is going to involve more people, not less. There's this narrative that because AI and automation is happening, that less and less people would have jobs. I don't agree with that. I think with AI and automation comes even a lot more jobs. What just might be different is that some of us may not have the skills that we need for those jobs. And that's already happening. Like Nigerian unemployment is, I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 60%. But every single day, I'm getting an email from people trying to hire developers or data engineers. So, what's happening? Their jobs, their people, there's no match, right? So I think jobs would be more human. The other thing that, the fourth thing that I think about jobs in the future is that they're going to be very, very community driven. And I think we already see some of this happen today. Some of the best companies in the world also have some of the best cultures in the world, if you ask me. They're companies that I'm not going to, I've said this before, but probably not here. I'm not going to say it on camera, just because I know a lot of them, so I don't want to heads as well. But there's a global company, one of the top 5 companies in the world, where I've met a lot of their staff. I've never met anyone that's just bad vibes, just random. It's random, but I've never met someone that works there that rubbed me the wrong way. I can't say that for a lot of companies, but it tells me about the culture and sort of like the community approach to the way they work. And I think increasingly that's going to happen because if you don't have to physically go to a place and you have to work for them, then there has to be something else that is an incentive. Particularly because, and maybe I should say this at this point, particularly because increasingly, and it's a sad thing, but increasingly, like I said earlier, we don't get value for the amount of, on the average, for people who work hard. There are lots of people, particularly on this side of the world, who do nothing and get paid. So, civil servants, I'm looking at you. Is there any civil servant here? I'm sorry, that was a slip. So, if I take you back to the example I gave earlier when I was telling the story, my dad worked hard, but in turn, his workplace, which was the government, paid for his master's degree abroad, paid for his housing or gave him housing for a bunch of years, gave him an official car, he had paid leave, probably was entitled to some travel, which he never took, but those were perks. How many places today give you the same? Okay. Still on that thread, if you wanted to, okay, this sounds a bit depressing, but it would take, I don't know how long it would take today to earn a decent salary by Nigerian standards and save enough to build a house. Sorry? 20 years. If the price remains constant. Yeah. But in 20 years, you still have to save around, I mean, the average house would probably, except you're buying one of those mass-produced ones, the average house is probably going to cost you like 20 million today. Okay, so you need to be able to save more than 20 million in 20 years. Yeah, so increasingly people are realizing that, work doesn't really pay me, so what am I here for, all right? And sometimes I think the thing that can keep people at a place is culture. If the culture is great. The last, thing that I think, the future of work would look like is that I think ultimately, and it started the last thing I said, is that the work is going to be more people-centric, more about people, more caring about people. Today, on the average, work doesn't really send you. They just need you to do stuff, right? Like you die, the next person comes. It needs to be done. But when, we get to the point where, or we're getting to the point where money is no longer as big an incentive as possible, as it should be, because the money you're getting isn't really taking you home. And then people also now have less ties to a place because, they're not physically there. They're not loyal to you in a sense. They can zap up and zap at any time. And there's been a lot of conversation around this, upping and zapping in the tech ecosystem in Nigeria today. But ultimately, you'd have to take care of the people if you want them to stay. Like, you need to give them, and this might be, stuff like just caring more about their welfare, caring more about their mental health. It may express itself in many ways, but I think that ultimately, work is going to have to pay more attention to its people. And those are sort of like the 5 things that, again, not exhaustive, but the sort of things I can think about around what work is going to look like. Any questions before I continue? If there are questions online, I'll look at them later and answer, but I want to know if there are any. Everybody looks very, somber. Is it sad? It seems like a bad sci-fi movie. Are we following? Are we good? So should I go on or should I just stop? Okay. Yeah, so all of this said, again, like I said, these are my thoughts, my opinions, not necessarily law. But if this were to happen, or if this is going to happen, then how do you prepare? I came, funny enough, I don't have that stat here, but I came across a stat a while ago that said something like, and it was talking about the US, but it said something like 6 out of every 10 children in high school, which is secondary school, are equivalent today, were being trained for jobs that do not exist. And when I, rather educated for jobs that do not exist, but when I came across that, like the first thing that shot to my head was the fact that, we say that about the US. So what does that mean for a place like Nigeria? Right. And another stat that I came across, and this is from the World Economic Forum, is that 42% of the core skills required in the workplace for existing jobs will change by this year, 2022. So meaning like 42% of everything you know about work would be irrelevant at some point this year. Again, stats don't necessarily work that way. It's not like there's a line in the sand that says, by September, 40% of your brain is going to melt or something. Like, it doesn't work that way, but it tells you more about like how much change is happening, and how we need to embrace that change. So what are the things, like, how do you prepare? So the future is, it's not all doom and gloom, but if the future is changing or the world is changing, and it is, like, how do you prepare for a changing world, like a constantly changing world? What are the things that you can do? So in my opinion, there are like two broad things. The first is around the way that we learn, and it's around I'm thinking about a non-corny way to say this, because I don't like things that rhyme and sound like all these motivational speakers, like but the thing that I'm trying to say is that I think that we need to learn how to actually learn and relearn. If the world is changing, or if the subject matter is changing, and it does change, like, one of the most amusing things to me is how we often argue so much about science, when in essence science is not fact but consensus. Right, like somebody does like a few experiments, everybody says, yeah, it looks good, we can't fault that logic, so we agree that is it. And then, down the line, someone else does a few other experiments that prove that everything you believed was total crap, and no one else can disprove that. You're like, so this is the new consensus, this is the new truth. Right, but these days, like, people take camps and argue, so much. But point from all of that is, like, if the world is changing, like, one of the most important things that you can do is for your mind itself to be flexible, and it's something that is very hard to do within our context, because we're socialized to think a certain way. You're socialized to think that life has a particular trajectory, and you have to fit in to that trajectory at all times. So how do you sort of like learn to learn and relearn? I think one of the fundamental ways to do this, and some of the most flexible, some of the most intelligent people and people that I've enjoyed working with, and that are always happy to jump on things, one common denominator is just that they expose themselves to a lot of knowledge, a lot of knowledge, a lot of different views, and you do that typically by reading, by traveling, sometimes by watching, but mostly the first two. That's because the more information you consume, the wider your mind sort of becomes. So you can go from being like very close-minded to being able to see things. Like one of the let me explain it this way. One of the things, or one of the phenomena that you would have seen today, and which happens a lot, and is a symptom of the fact that a lot of our minds are closed, is just how offended people get when you disagree with them. I said one of the examples, or one of the outputs of how closed our minds are today, are just how offended we get when people disagree with us. You agree A, I agree B. Why are we fighting? Right? Like, the only way I can go to Kano is if I fly. And somebody says, no, you can drive. I'm like, I'm not driving, I'm flying. Like, no, you have to drive. It makes no sense. Right? But that's a very elementary example. But the point is that when you grow up, and again, unfortunately, we're all victims of this if you grow up in this country. When you grow up within a culture and a country that first is very anti-curiosity and very anti-intellectualism, that's what you get. I mean, as a child, you're reading books, your friends will call you Efiko. It's derogatory, right, for reading books. So you should not read. What should you do? Right. So it starts really early. Like a child asks questions and say, "Shut up! What are you? Adults are talking here." Not like the adults know anything, but adults are talking. Children to talk. And all of that, and it breeds this very, very closed system where information doesn't even circulate versus get to the point where people even are able to absorb it, right? And then there are now this very few centers of information that become authorities, like religious houses and things like that. So you would take what your pastor or imam says, but you would not even think with your brain that the thing might be crap, right? Again, please don't. This is not to say pastors and imams are bad. They're not. But it's just the fact that we grow up in a society that, by default, stifles the very thing that you need to get ahead in the future. And I can give you an example from today. I finished talking and I asked any question. Everybody was looking. And a funny thing, I've been saying this. I've said this thing I'm about to say. I've said it maybe 7 times this week, which is weird. But for context, one of the times, I think in 2018 or so, myself and a bunch of people, we went for a Facebook thing. And one of the reasons why we're there was to mentor some kids, some high school kids in the US. So, I mean, Robert, if you know Robert is there as well, but all the other mentors were not from Nigeria. And I mean, we had lunch with these kids for about an hour or so. And in between food, and for context, these are shy, underprivileged kids. So they're from the Hispanic community, not some of them don't even speak English really well. But over lunch, they asked us over 100 questions. At some point, one of our colleagues, who I think is from, I want to say she's from Zambia, but I'm not sure. She ran away because she got tired. Somebody asks the question, you answer, off you answer, 3 other questions happen. But it got me thinking about how that doesn't happen here. It was just very weird to me. Again, I didn't know it was a thing, but experiencing that and coming back and asking any questions, and everybody just everybody kept quiet, and then maybe the very brave ones will send you an email later and say, I had this question, but anyways, yeah. Expose yourself to new ideas. It happens a lot. 2 ways that I know that it's happened is consuming a lot of information, reading, listening to podcasts and stuff. I typically think that you start, and again, personal opinion, you start to know that you are getting it right when you're able to listen to an argument that you don't agree with, but you can understand the logic and merits of it. Someone can make an argument and say, I mean, I'll give an example of this. I read a book once that, at some point, one of the chapters towards the end summed religion as, it tried to draw parallels between religion and the fans of a football club, and basically say they were the same thing. Now, I don't agree with that, but the argument was sound, and the rest of the book made a lot of sound arguments that I don't discredit the whole book based on that chapter. But I'm I get what you're saying, but no, I don't agree, because I can counter argue it. But that's fine. like I feel like you start to get to the point where you're making progress when you're able to have those sort of moments where you're like, yeah, this argument is totally fine. Like I get the logic of it, it makes sense, but I don't agree with it, and that's fine, right? So second thing is to really stay flexible, and then the third thing, which I probably highlighted a bit, but is to embrace break the cycle of culture. And I have a friend who, if she's listening, she'd be like, yes, Anisi has gone to culture again. But culture is not a bad thing. Culture is sort of like our collective memory of the way that we live. But if the world is changing and the way that we live is changing, then it only makes sense to me that culture also is supposed to evolve. And culture has evolved. Like we're not doing the same thing the people that lived in the same space 100 years ago are doing. We're definitely not. In some parts of Nigeria, people kill twins as part of culture. That doesn't happen again today. So culture does change, but there's almost this, humans are always going to resist change, but there's almost this, I don't want to dig too deep into that, but there's almost this collective resistance to moving forward that I don't quite get. And when I say culture, I mean the things that we collectively do, but also the habits that we have imbibed. Like one of my favorite questions to ask in the world, and everyone in Colab knows this question because I say it a lot, is why do we have our bath in the morning? It's one of my favorite questions because most people don't have an answer to that. We grew up being baited in the morning, so we just started baiting in the morning. What's wrong with bathing at night or in the afternoon? And again, obviously, this is not to say you shouldn't bathe, but the point I'm trying to bring out is the fact that we don't even think about stuff like that. So if you don't think about why you bathe in the morning, what else are you taking for granted? What else are you doing that might be detrimental or not to you, but you just do without thinking? Right? And we do a lot of things like that. But if you're not able to break out of that, in the example that I gave earlier, like when I started this, it was hard for me to see outside the good life I thought I had working at where I worked. I don't say their name again because I don't want to make it seem like working there is bad. It's not. It's a fantastic place. It's one of the best places I've worked in the world. But I wasn't able to see outside that hamster wheel of, what I was doing, going in circles, because it became it sort of was my own mini culture. I knew what I was going to do in the morning, I knew what I was going to do in the afternoon, I knew what I was going to do in the weekends, in that circle. So when you're in that hamster wheel, it's hard to see outside of it. It's one of the things that I know is expensive and maybe not the safest these days, but it's also one of the things that traveling does for you. When you just leave that immediate environment and see the environment you live in from the perspective of someone else who is living in another place, it does a lot. And I'm not even talking, fancy travel is good, but if you talk to an uneducated driver that travels a lot, and you talk to one that doesn't, the difference is very clear. Both of them uneducated. It helps open the mind. The second thing, broad thing that you can prepare with is embracing technology. And when I say embracing technology, I don't mean that everybody in this world needs to be a programmer or a data scientist or a UX designer. I mean that there is at the fundamentals of it a culture or a system that is built on curiosity and that tests things. All right, asks questions and tests things. And that is it. One of the most heartbreaking things for me is that in Nigeria today, not even rural Nigeria, I'm talking about urban Nigeria. I'm sure somewhere on this street is happening, and somewhere in Angwarimi is happening as well. People still go to the well and take a guga and throw it inside and pour water out. Egyptians that lived in the 1700s solved that problem. I mean, Rome, if I'm not mistaken, had a flowing water system, but let's not even talk about flowing water. What happened to pulleys? Right? Why must you throw this thing and pull it up? Why can't you build something more efficient to bring the water to the surface? It doesn't even have to be a pump. It might just be a pulley system where you pull and it comes up, or something. But it's 2022 and we're still doing that, and everybody thinks it's absolutely normal. Again, because we can't see outside of that hamster wheel. So it's always been done this way. So I mean, we need to interrogate these things, interrogate everything, and test them, find better ways to do things. So the last thing, I'm getting towards the end of this. So those two things are how I think you should prepare, learning to learn and relearn, and embracing technology. So the last thing I want to end with before we just discuss generally is one of the things I said earlier was that I read this World Economic Forum article that said 42% of the skills that you need in the workplace would have changed by this year, 2022. So what are those skills that you need for the future of work? Again, like I've said at every point, these are my own personal opinions. So I mean, I'll list 5 of them, and then if they're not self-explanatory, we can discuss. So the first one is creativity, second one is critical thinking, third one, self-management, fourth one is social intelligence, and the fifth one, in my opinion, is time or attention management. People used to call it time management, but there's been an argument recently that you can't manage time because you don't control it. You can manage your own attention. So some people call it attention management these days. I mean, we know what creativity is. Yes? Okay. We know what critical thinking is. I'm trying to avoid explaining any of this, so I'm doing. I know you guys won't say no, so I'll just ask and say yes. And I'll be done. So everybody knows what critical thinking is. Yes. Everyone knows what self-management is. Yes. Okay. Social intelligence? Yes? No. Okay. I thought I was going to. Okay. I mean, so social intelligence is just basically people skills, the ability to walk into a room and talk to people, the ability to have conversations, the ability to manage people, to be emotionally sensitive and stuff like that. It's stuff that we're losing very fast at an alarming rate. On the average, most of the people that I interact with, particularly people who walk in here, have very bad people skills. They don't know how to talk. They don't know how to hold conversation. They don't know how to, and it's different from being shy. I'm a very shy person. You can see by the fact that I'm not meeting any of you people at the eyes. I'm looking up and looking at other places. But it doesn't mean that I can't hold conversation with you. So it's not being shy. Don't hide under that umbrella. It's people skills. Now, the reason why it's super important, and I can explain that, is that social skills are typically stuff that you learn when you interact socially with people, right? So you're playing with kids, you pick it up and stuff, but because of how the world is changing, a lot of those social activities are happening anymore. Growing up, I spent the bulk of daylight hours with other kids. I left school and I had like a lot of friends who would all go around each other's houses and play, or would go to the field and play football, play basketball, play tennis. I mean, it was when I grew up, like when I got to like university, maybe secondary school a bit, but university mostly, that I realized that it wasn't normal that I realized that it was normal for kids not to be able to play any sport. I didn't think it was normal because I grew up in a place where everybody played sport. It didn't matter whether you were good or not. You came out to play. So social skills you learn by interacting with people, but then we're moving into this distributed world where that interaction is even getting less and less. So it's getting more critical to be able to interact, right? Because you don't even have like the normal cues that you'd have, the facial expressions, all of that you're missing. So you still need to be able to tell from, say, the tone of an email or the tone of a chat what message the person is trying to come across, whether the person is upset with you or whether the person is just, just someone who talks briskly. So that's what social intelligence is. Attention management, So I mean that is the end. That's where my notes end. Happy to answer any questions or comments, or talk about comments, or discuss further if there's anything that pops up. I'll just look online, see if there are any questions as well.
So I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, last week Saturday.
Yes.
You said.
I can't remember what I said last Saturday.
Yeah,
it's no longer valid. Sorry, just go on. I'm joking.
You said money.
Yes.
Should not motivate. Should not be the deciding factor in whatever you choose to do.
I don't believe so. Yeah.
From what I grabbed from your story, the MTN story.
Yes.
Because you were enjoying the job. So you left it because of money.
It wasn't just because of money. I mean, so there are a bunch of things. I left because I wasn't getting the chance. Besides money, when I left MTN, I started making less money. So I didn't leave for more money. When I left MTN on my birthday, and I took the next month watching TV, playing games, and then somewhere around the 20th, I'm like, guy, you don't have a salary this month, so what's going on? And the really interesting thing was they actually did pay me for that month, but I had to return the money because I'm a good guy like that. But I started thinking, and I didn't make as much money as I was making MTN for at least a year or two, right? But that said, even while I was at MTN, I was doing a lot of side things. I was building websites and apps for a lot of people, so I was making money on the side. But for that particular, after I quit, I didn't do anything. I felt like I was retired, freedom. I just didn't think about the money part till then. So I didn't leave because of the money. It wasn't a money related decision, but it was just the fact my dad felt like I was putting in so much work and not getting the reward. So if I'm going to put in that much work would give me, even if it gives me the same amount of reward in other endeavors, at least any day I'm tired, I'll just not go. But with MTN, I couldn't do that. So it wasn't the money thing. Yeah.
I thought I have two questions there. So the first one is, you mentioned that loyalty is dying in work industries these days. Loyalty is kind of dying because nobody wants to be loyal when they're not being treated right. If I get what you meant.
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah. So, does that mean that the future of work is weak in a way? Because if we are not seeing people sticking around to build something great, then how do you expect to have a better future in terms of, how everything is built?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, so let me take them one after the other so I don't forget. I think the first thing is, I don't think the future is bleak. I think that it might look bleak if you look at it within the context of what we do now, because we assume that what we do now is normal and is the right thing to do, but it's not, it's consensus. So nobody says people can't build great things by not being in the same place at the same time. I think it's possible to build great things without being physically located in the same place. We may not have figured it out in entirety yet, but I think that we would figure it out eventually. So I don't think the future is bleak in that regard. But I also think that the other thing that is going to happen is people aren't, the disloyalty to work isn't because people have grown a new gene that makes them disloyal. It's more because on some levels there are more options, right, for everyone. So I mean, if you have more options, then there's a scarcity. So it means that you can jump from place to place. And I mean, one of the really interesting things, and this is just a sidebar, but one of the really interesting things I bumped into very recently when I was reading up around the talent shortage, particularly in tech. Everybody tells you, there are 6 jobs for every developer and stuff like that, and that's sort of like the leading statistic. But depending on what report you read, one of the really shocking things to me is that between 40 and 70% of the people that are actively working in tech today want to move. So they're in tech already, but they're not happy about the jobs that they have today, so they want to move. So it tells me that the problem is not just talent, but it's also the fact that a lot of people are not happy with the way their jobs is currently structured. And it's easy to see. I mean, you work 9 to 5 every day, and somebody else who is working remote is maybe doing, and again, the politics of this or the arguments around it are neither here nor there, and I'm not getting into that, but someone else might be doing 2 or 3 jobs and has more free time than you do. So I mean, why would you want to stay in the 9 to 5 when you can leave and also be like the person, right? So it's that. So I think work is also eventually going to have to think about, like, how do we optimize these things to work for us. Today or before now, it was sort of like an employer's market. So I mean, you take whatever they give you. These days, that's sort of shifting. So employers need to start thinking about, well, how do I make these people happy? How do I ensure that they are giving me maximum productivity? How do I cater to them in ways that would bring out sort of like the best sort of output? So I don't think the future is bleak in summary.
My second question has to do with, I need your personal opinion on this.
Okay.
What would you advise to somebody who wants to build like really something out of the ordinary, and with the current situation in Nigeria, I mean the things happening in the person's life, and then enthusiastic about building the future, and then at the same time forces against him, and wanting to join, maybe presented an opportunity to join maybe the civil service where everything is guaranteed, to something that is 50-50. I mean, I feel that is the problem. For example, my field, the field that I am in, it's basically no pension and gratuity. You build now and then enjoy later. So, and I feel a lot of people in the field I work in are trying to move to the civil service, because if you break your leg tomorrow, nobody will bring food for you. At least your salary will come and the government is empathetic to your cause. So, in a situation whereby you want to build something great because you see that your field is quite bad, and then you have other or other problems creeping up, and then there's an opportunity to go into the civil service and grow, at least your retirement will be guaranteed. If somebody comes to you and maybe somebody that is diverse in all these things they've mentioned, what would be your advice to that person?
I mean, so interesting question. I think there's a lot to unpack. I think the very first thing that comes to mind is the idea that the civil service. I mean, two things. First, the idea that your retirement is guaranteed after civil service. It used to be back in the day. I mean, these days, how much? I mean, they're paying you after 65 years of service. You're getting like 30K. Not sure 30K per month, is I mean, 30K a bunch of years ago maybe was a lot. To be honest, I don't know. 30K is like a number I'm picking up from my head, but I'm not sure it's very far from that. I'm not 100% certain that the guarantees that were there in the past for maybe our parents or grandparents are still there today in the civil service. I don't think so. The quality of life that our parents and our grandparents got in the civil service is definitely not what people are getting today. That part is sure. So I mean, if you're not getting that in active service, then I'm not certain that they would get that, outside service. So that's one. The second thing that actually, jumps to mind is also the idea that you cannot build something that changed the world from within the civil service. I think people can. I think it's possible to build life-changing work. I think it's a very difficult environment for innovation, but I think it's possible. So that said, I think ultimately it's something that's going to be a personal call, but I think that there are a bunch of things to think about. One is, what your risk tolerance is like, because there's always going to be a risk to reward thing. For instance, and this is me personally, I think I have better chances of, by quitting the job that I quit, like that sort of, tells you that my risk appetite is a bit high. So I'm willing to take risks and hope that those risks pay off and that I'll be able to retire in a better position than I would have been if I was there. There are no guarantees that will happen. It's a risk. It's always going to be a risk. So, whatever, even, the civil service in the short term might feel less risky, but it's also, a very big risk, because what happens if, at some point in the future, the country can afford to pay that gratuity, and it's happening, right? So, I would say, everyone knows their situation better. Like I typically tell people that while a lot of the advice is, that you should, secure. A lot of the advice is very short term, like secure short term. I think that thinking long term is a bit better. And thinking long term means that sometimes you have to take some short term detours to ensure that you still exist in the long term. You want to change the world, but you are hungry and you don't have food, you die before you can change the world, right? So those are I hope, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Yes? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, it's more like a personal question and like a general question. Growing up till now, my brothers have always been like passionate about what exactly they want to do. And so I thought, perhaps maybe when I get into something that I like, then okay, fine, I'll think I'm passionate about it. But being in like the tech field, for instance, and maybe like going through everything the past 2 years, and you think, fine, I think I'm passionate about this, let me continue. But then you see, you're not really seeing the result, and you're like, okay, let money be my motivation for now. And you're still not seeing the money. And you're picking the money. And you're like, which one should I pick? Should I just continue and feel like maybe in the future something good will come in? Or should I just like branch and then like cash the money now and then I'll go back to it? Which one should it be? Should it be the passion for now, or should it be the money?
I mean, that's an interesting question, and I usually don't like answering these questions because I remember having a conversation with someone asked me something like this when I was serving. We're both serving, or just shortly after service. He asked me a question like this, and I gave him my answer, and he ended up quitting his job and suffering for a very long time. Then going back to the same job. So again, I think a lot of these things are personal. That said, I think that, and this is not an answer to you, but it's just sort of like me thinking through the problem, right? I think that knowing what I know now, one of the things that is very important, particularly the younger you are, is how much time you have. So I think that a lot of that time should be spent on things that you're passionate about that also make money if possible. Because you don't get the time when you grow older. I'm not even old, but I don't have the time for a lot of the things I want to do. Right? I love playing games. I haven't played any game in months. So I think that with time, if time is on your side, then you should fall on the passion side, and the money eventually does come. Because one of the things, and that's one of the advantages of living in a place like Kaduna, and I say this a lot, is that the economic pressure on you is not so much. So your runway is a lot longer than, say, someone who is in Lagos, right? Sorry.
I actually live in Lagos.
You live in Lagos? My apologies. I don't know, I can't help you. I'm sorry. So I mean, in a place like Lagos, to be honest, the economic pressures are a lot more. You need to try and make money as fast as possible to stay afloat, right? And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. While in Kaduna, you can stroll down the road and eat 100 naira akara, and you're fine. There's a downside to that as well. It means that for people who grow up here, you may not have the drive that people in Lagos have. But what I would say is, I think that you should always, it's taking time to do stuff without the motivation of money that gets people really good. That's sort of been, I don't know anyone that is very good at anything that is purely motivated by money. That's really good, has good mastery of anything that's purely motivated by money, except the person is a fraudster. Then yeah, those are the exceptions. But I don't know any fraudsters, so I don't know anybody. All right, so my answer would be, I always think, passion is a good, particularly like you said, the money isn't coming, the passion side isn't, so just do the passion, if the outcomes are the same, and you find that at some point you would have mastered whatever it is you're doing so much that people would pay for the mastery that you have, and no one else would have it because they've spent that time chasing money. Does that answer your question?
Can I also add to that?
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is, but I think when we start a lot of the things we never take a short journey to the end of it. For instance, you want to do, say, digital marketing, because that's really so popular. And I think most of the time we're excited by how much we hear about it. But we hardly try to say, okay, let's take a bit of time to look at where this goes to the end. And then try to research a bit on the people who are actually doing these things. And be really objective about it. Because it feels like everybody, for instance, and I get this a lot, people come to do data science, for instance, and I often notice, you get me, and I'm not saying this to drag anybody, but I often notice that they do data science and the next thing they get in design class.
Sorry.
I personally take offense.
No, it's your point.
Wait first. So, what? Like it could be for many reasons, but this personally, I think because a lot of things don't really look good as when you started, right? The motivation seems to die, and the ones that look aesthetically pleasing seems to be appealing. And of course, the aesthetically pleasing ones have good rewards at the end. Even the ones that don't really good have that. But what I've noticed is, it seems that there's this short-term thing that happens when you come to look at a skills area of knowledge. And it's short-term to look and say, okay, how good does this look? But nobody goes to the other end of it to find out, okay, what is moving the needle in this field? And the people who are doing this, what are they doing? And how is that important to the things that change the world? Right? And that's what makes it really hard, I think, makes it really hard for people to decide what they want to do. Right, that's why, again, you would want to do something like, okay, so what's going to drive me for this? What's going to, is it the money? Is it this? And then, of course, people start with the money, but sometimes, because that's driving you, the patience, you don't have it. But I think, and what my thought process is, if you go to the end of it, which is you find out people doing stuff, you look at the things that change people's life, and then you see that you sit back and say, okay, I'm going to take this journey. Another example I use is medicine, right? The rewards for medicine, and yeah, there are rewards in medicine, is it's obvious because people fall sick, right? And you see it, that people fall sick, you need doctors and all, and so no need reminding you that doctors are important, right? But people go to do medicine 8 years, 7 years. Right? The things that stop people from maybe completing medicine might be the intellectual part of it, but people do it. And you see people saying, when I'm done with this, I'm going to leave Nigeria. Because they're sure, they've seen it happening, right? And they say it's going to be better elsewhere. But when you start to do things in tech, for instance, and a lot of the time, what drives you in there is probably what you see on Twitter, or people saying, here is where I was, here is where I am later. You find out that you're so focused on that, you don't have that. So I think what I'm saying in essence is try traveling to the end of it in your head, and then see what is there, and tell yourself that's where you're going to, then try starting from there. I don't know if that makes sense.
Awesome. The other thing I wanted to add, like I just remembered, it was one of the things that I had in my mind, but when he was talking, I remembered is, the journey to success, and success isn't actually money, right? But the journey to success isn't linear, even though it often looks that way from the outside. So it has ups and downs, and there's always that steep curve to the point where you want to stop. But if you keep going, like you get to the point where it sort of plateaus, and it's a lot easier. So that's what I wanted. Yeah, sorry.
To go back to what she's saying around passion and money is, so for me, I think either passion or money is the circle you find yourself in. For example, like joining Colab, for example, I had so many people doing well already. So when I came, the first time I joined Colab, first time I joined Colab. Wait, I came to Colab first. There wasn't so many people doing well. Yeah. Went back 1 year to finish school, came back, and a lot of people are doing well. Then again, there's that thing of I also want to do well, yeah. So there's now that passion and money driving. But now starting the same career path with a lot of people, like a lot of friends doing the same thing. One person is blowing up, another person is blowing up, coming down, blowing up, coming down. But being in that same space where the passion is there's a point where the passion is not there. The money will also not there, like you're saying. But just having a chain of people doing the same thing, a guy who can do the same together, it made a lot of sense. It's like entering different places together. Like when I was going applying for Top Job, Shegun started between 2018, did like 2018, 19, 20, got in this year. Started last year May. They kicked me out like twice. But then again, the fact that my guy is there and somebody entering there made it easier for me. Shegun 2 years, mine was 10 months. Only I was 3 months. And I'm sure the next person will be 2 weeks because there are a lot of people doing it. Next person might be 2 years also. But just having the chain of people doing it around you, when the partner is there, when the money is not there, you can just keep that fire burning.
Sorry, yes.
So, in the course of your talk with us this morning, you mentioned, but I quite agree with that though, what's the Nigerian educational space spinning out right now does not really match in any way with what is the actual reality in our world of today. And the general thinking is that Africa is behind, but if we were behind 40 years compared to the world, I think now we've caught up some 30 years, so we are some 10 years close to catching up with the world, and who knows, maybe the next 5 years will probably be at par with other parts of the world. That being said, what do you have to offer? Because you see, you're talking to us, most of us are based here, except for this lady who said she's from Lagos. But you see, most of us are based here. Most of us have backgrounds that are not tech inclined or not even inclined to what the world is offering now, the future of work. What do you have to offer? You, not you, as you say, Colab, by means of helping people. I know you run a bit of some courses, but particularly for people who want to transition. Now I'm talking for myself. I've been looking for a way to transition into tech for a very long time. And anybody I talk to, maybe I believe I've been talking to the wrong people. So they will always make it look like, it's like this. And I'm like, I'm not dumb. I know that if I start something, I will do well at it. So do you offer anything like apprenticeship, something like that? You have apprenticeship, people learning under you. I know you will do internship, but for someone to come and intern, he or she has a knowledge. I'm talking of someone who has a zero background, So how can you help, or how do people like us come in? Yeah, that's it.
And how long will it take?
How long for me is not an issue. For me personally, it might be a problem for somebody else. But how long for me is not a problem.
Sorry, please.
Yes.
I think by coincidence, my question is also very close to that.
Okay.
I have a very sort of regarding that. So I think if you add it all together, it will make a very straight answer. So I think you started with the story of how you had an encounter with change and how the discussion with your dad. I had the same encounter with you, but that's on Twitter.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, I worked in microfinance bank back then, and I was somewhere in Niger State. I saw this picture of you and your family and your kids and all that, and I was like, oh, this is the kind of life I want to choose. I started working my way, and I never lived in Kaduna before, so I had to look for a way to get transferred here. And one more longer, I got here years back, and I started this journey. So the question how it relates to harassers, if you are starting today, if you left anything today, what's the roadmap you're going to choose first?
Okay. I mean, those are really interesting questions. So to the core question, I think that first of all, it's never too late, and I can tell you that Colab has. I mean, pretty much everything we do is sort of like entry level, except maybe one thing. Everything is sort of like targeted at people who haven't had like exposure before, right? However, and it's deliberate for two reasons. One, I am not convinced, and maybe you could have derived that from what I've said today. I'm not convinced that the best way to learn is the way we learn today. which is sitting in a classroom and someone telling you stuff. I don't think so. And I've probably not said this here before, so maybe I'll say it and I'll leak the secret. But the very idea of the courses that we do, like the idea behind them, wasn't to teach people stuff. It was to get them in the door, to get them to come here. The real value of a place like this, when done right, is not the courses that you do. It's the people you're interacting with. That's the real value. It's the people you're interacting with and the culture that is built around the place. That culture eventually starts to shape you, right? And I mean, and I think it was interesting when Pablo was talking and said they come for data science and yeah, but I mean, one of my, I have funny these days. I have like a lot of really fantastic stories about people who came here. But one of, and I just heard another one, but one of my favorite, stories today is Mudia's story, right? And Mudia, not a lot of people know this, but Mudia sent me, I didn't know Mudia from Adam, but he sent me a DM on Twitter. I don't even think I was in the country then, about being in Sokoto, rounding up service and not wanting to go back home, but wanting to come to Colab to learn data science. And when I got that DM, I'm like, I probably shouldn't, I'm not sure it's a good thing to ask this guy to come. Because you go to a new city, you don't know anything, you just want to immerse yourself in data science. But he did come, he just put on Slack one day that he's around, because I asked him to join Slack. He's around and this, but then he had found a place to stay, because one of his challenges was not having a place to stay. To fast forward the story, I used to check in and he'd say, this data science thing, well, it's making some sense, but it's a bit difficult. For me, and one day he was like, I don't know whether I need to continue this, it's hard. And I'm like, yeah, there's always this incline. But one day I walked into Colab and I saw him designing a logo or something on his laptop, and I was like, do you know what Figma is? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay, download Figma and go and play with it. I think it would interest you. And then I have this friend who might be watching this, Chukudi also, who's in New York, and he had come here to do some stuff around design before. And I'm like, I'll link you up with Chukudi. He'll give you books, he'll give you guidance, videos and stuff. And I'm not sure Mudia remembers anything from data science today, but I think he is one of the best product people in this country today. I think I'll put money on Mudia. I think he's one of the best people. And the point of it is this. It's one of the reasons why I think he's one of them. Maybe I should dig deep. One of the reasons why I think he's one of the best is he didn't just learn design. He doesn't approach design from just regurgitating what he's learned from design, but he's able to pull the experience he has from data science and web development and every other thing into his design. And again, to go back to my earlier point, that is the value, because you're meeting so many people doing different things. Okay, I won't call his name because I know he's watching, because he left a comment. But there are two people from Colab now who work at Microsoft, and I was talking to the person, one of the people who interviewed them and hired them. What about these people, stuck out? Why did you hire them? And she was like, one of the things that stood out for her was just the breadth of knowledge they had, not depth. Typically when they hire technical people, they have depth, right? Some guy is good with Node.js, he has been doing Node.js for, in fact, before the person made it, he started using it, and he knows everything about it. But typically, and he's good, but he typically doesn't know anything about anything else. But that's how people learn here, even technical on their own. So this guy is like a React ninja, and it's just React, and this guy is a front end guy, it's just front end. This one is just back end. We want to specialize because that's sort of how we take, that's how we're socialized to learn in a sense. But that they knew so many things that, it made sense to them, because typically they find like depth, but these guys knew the depth, but they also knew like a lot of things, so they're able to hop. And the interesting thing was, I was talking to one of them yesterday during downtime. I was like, these days at work, they don't really have those delineations anymore. Like, you start a project and you take it to the end. All right, so nobody's doing, I'm just doing front end, or I'm just doing back end, I'm not doing DevOps. They're learning and having to do everything. And one of my, and this is a very long conversation, which if you remind me at the end, if you're interested, I can have. But one of the things that I'm increasingly convinced about, particularly as it relates to the future of work, is that specialization is no longer as useful as generalization is today. It's better to know more about different things than to know a lot about one thing. So to answer your question, or the questions, one, I think the value of just first figuring out one of the things that you want to do, and then pursuing, doubling down on it in an environment that encourages you to do that, would give you way more traction than going to school for anything. And that's just the secret. That's my thesis on that. And the second thing, which again a lot of you guys would know, but might interest you because I think I'm meeting you for the first time, is I'm a microbiologist. I didn't study anything to do. I didn't study technology or do anything in tech. I studied microbiology, applied microbiology, and I was a good one, I think, because everywhere I worked as a microbiologist, they tried to retain me. Everywhere I interned, actually, they tried to retain me. But I finished service, and in like 3 months I was working at MTN, not as a microbiologist. Again, what you learn is not a cage, is not irrelevant to today. It's just finding ways to apply like the knowledge you already have to this. For the question about how long, it depends. Everybody moves at, learning isn't linear, everybody moves at different paces, right? So for some people, I know two people actually, so not just one person, who did 6 weeks of code school. And the funny thing is interesting because both of them at some point were at Andela. But the first person finished 6 weeks of code school and a couple of weeks hanging around Colab and started working remotely for a company in Ireland as a software engineer. The second person also finished code school and got a job in Rwanda. Joined Andela and then got a job in Rwanda. But there are people who, were in the same class as them that are all just picking up today. So it depends a lot on you and not, which is another thing that's flawed about school. Like the idea that you go to school for 6 years and because you've been there for 6 years, you automatically know X, Y, Z doesn't make sense to me. Right? So it depends on how much time you put in and your own person. That's what I think. Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, based on what you said about people using data science to design and all that, is it because of the difficulty or less time rewarding, like for the data science? And also, is it just about aesthetics?
I have my answers to that, but do you want my answer or his answer? Because go ahead.
Okay.
Because you originally brought that
So
up.
I'll answer yours and also help answer yours too, because I'm interested in that. I'm doing data science and I'm a graduate of public admin. If that doesn't help. I just make it. I try as much as possible to get into public admin because it was a course you could do if you had F9 in maths. Yeah. And when I was in my third year, I realized I was not going to do that. But again, I think the thing we have about getting into these uncharted areas, like you said, is the fear that has been instilled in us. Right? Just on the other side, right? Back when I decided to get into IT, I was doing Cisco networks and stuff. And then people used to be so afraid to take the Cisco certification, right? And And when people come to me, they will tell me that whoever taught them warned them against taking it. The person who trained for one new street is never. You get? So, but that's one. You have to go past the fear, because there's no currency in the fear. You would find out that for like 4 years, you're going to keep telling yourself, I'm a graduate of law, I'm a graduate of public admin, economics, or not economics, it's a bit technical, public admin, political science, and you still haven't gotten into what you're doing. And it's 4 years. So you have to now say, you know what, let me pick up a book, data science book, and I'll read it, and even if I don't get it, I'll Google it. And that's where those skills, the soft skills, your ability to learn stuff comes from. And before you know it, you're already taking one step. And to amaze you how fast you can do that. And then the question you asked, no, so it wasn't about, it's not the aesthetics, actually. It's just the fact that people are doing different kind of things, right? And people come into the space to learn, and I think they are focused on how good it looks than the end product. And if data science was as aesthetically pleasing as design, people would do the opposite. People will come in and see that, okay, we're going to use Figma to ingest data, and everybody's going to, oh, that looks fine. And then if design school was, okay, import pandas as Figma, people would probably say this is boring. But if you go to the end of it, and you look at both of them, you're going to see where they are, right? Or if you look at data science, you're going to see, oh, this is what these guys are doing with data science. And these cases they are being applied, even in public admin, in microbiology, everything. So that's why I say it's not about how aesthetical it is. It's just that we don't go to the end of it. We just come and say, we want to do this, and just go into it. Then after we're asking, okay, what am I even doing? And that's where you start saying, okay, I think I need to do something else. Which is also, the lines are really blurred, because that's how you find out what you want to do right away. But at the same time, these things happen.
Well, it's very still as like design in general. Is it still as rewarding with so many people engaging in it?
Reward. Again, like for me, I look at value. What value does the web have for people's lives? Think about it. You research yourself. Is that value there? And if that value is there, then I think it still has value. But if it's there, then but I don't think so.
Yeah. Is it an answer to the question, or sure?
So,
go ahead.
I think an answer to that again is why people leave leave data science to design. So I think another answer to that is communications. Yeah. So you can have a guy coming wanting to learn data science, and because it's Colab, after classes people hang around to have just conversations or play games. And during this conversation, somebody's telling another person around what he's learning in design. And it interests you. I want to just see what's happening there. I've seen people leave data science to design and get to design and tell you, oh, if it's because of difficulty level, they still come to design and still run from design. Because they think design is just drawing squares and changing colors. But I think again, another thing that made them have those decisions again is just around the kind of conversations they have. I came in trying to learn WordPress from Samsung, and they told me, why don't you want to learn WordPress? You should do web. So I learned web, have conversation with Ifani, and it's a different case. I spoke with Hafiz and Moody, like, okay, do design. At the end of the day, I'm here. So it's just how, and I don't think there's anything wrong you going through the whole circle. It's just what interests you and just do there.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead.
So, you shouldn't feel bad about coming to learn one thing and then switching, right? I feel if you want to learn a skill, be in your experimental phase. When I spoke to someone, says AI, get to learn a product, right? And I've done AI, I've done web, I've like experimented on different things. Even for data science, right, there are cool ways to get into aesthetics and show you crazy, amazing data visualizations and like, I want to learn this. But I think what you need at the end of the day is to say, okay, I've experimented, and this is one I'm more in tune with, right? I one of the reasons I enjoy design was apart from the visuals, I love actually talking to people, and that's one big part of design. So like, I'm not in tune with this. I want to try this out. But for everything I gave that high level of concentration. One way with data science, that's probably we to sleep in Colab. We will study, take courses, write code. So it's the same thing, just transfer that tenacity into whatever you want to do. And if you're just at the stage where you're not feeling it, transfer it to something else again until you find your groove. That's how I think you should go about it.
Does that answer your question sufficiently, or you still want to hear my? So, sorry. What's the question again, please?
Why people leave data science?
Yeah, I think they covered a lot of it. I think that one of the things maybe they didn't mention, but I think is also a factor, is it's sort of like the actual phrase for it is skipping my head now, so I'll skip it. But when you do something, or like the thing that motivates you to do something is sort of like a reward, or a reward that your brain gets for doing that thing. I think the time to reward in stuff like design is very short. So it's easier for you to trail along. You do this, you see it almost instantly. It makes sense to you. With data science, you have to take a lot of time. I mean, with Figma or stuff, you can open and play around, and in fact, there's like a demo project when it loads, if I'm not mistaken, except it's changed. And you can play around and say, oh, okay, so this is how this sort of looks. With stuff like data science, you have to take a lot of time to understand the fundamentals first, before you sort of start playing. That's not to say that there are no interesting ways to start with data science. One of the most interesting data science, call it projects or something, learning exercises that I've seen, and I think is super interesting, and maybe we should always start data science with that one, is calculating whether you would have stayed alive or sunk if you got on the Titanic. I mean, it's very interesting. It's a lot of data science, but it's also like really interesting because it's stuff that you're curious about. Some of it is approach, but I think that reward, the time it takes to reward is sort of longer than most. For design is quite short. Like you start getting the reward even before you learn fundamentals, because you drag something, it moves. You drag it back, it goes back, right? So I think that's part of it. I also think that for right now at this point, a couple of years ago, we probably had more people doing data science because we had like a stronger data science community. Like there were more people doing data science, so that influenced a lot of stuff. Now, all these design people are all over the place, so I think that's also influencing a lot of stuff. That said, I think it's ideal that everyone sort of learns bits and pieces of everything. More questions? Okay, lady first, I'm sorry.
I think for the past 2 months now, I've been so interested in data analysis.
Okay.
And I don't know why, because I just feel like it's super cool for me to learn it. And I love the whole idea of like the one in charge of analyzing the whole stuff. And I don't want to be that kind of data person that stays at home. I don't really like it. I don't like being indoor. Like I want to be out. I want to see the whole stuff, how it happens and everything. But I've not really like gotten like a good like a good place to like sit down and learn. Like I've seen so many YouTube videos on how people like the whole explanation and everything. But like people have not really told me. I've like spoke with some people and everything. But I've not really gotten people to like one-on-one and tell me, okay, these are the things that you need to learn. These are the these are the things that you are not supposed to. These are the things that you need to put more more focused on, like for instance, now I told that for me to learn data analysis, I have to learn Python, I have to be very good at it, I have to be very good at Excel and some other stuff like that. And I mean, I tried, what's it called? I tried going for Google certification stuff and learn from them. But they keep giving me so many money to spend and I don't have that kind. But I'm trying to like get the whole idea of if I want to be in a data, if I want to be like a data analyst, for instance, like that, what exactly do I need to do? Is it like a long-term something or it's like a short-term something? Because I'm not really getting people that are doing it for that long. So is it like it's short-term? Is it like it's long-term? Is it like something I can continue doing in the future? Or will I just dump it one time and then something like that?
I mean, so short answer is I think you're in the right place. You should talk to Pablo and Naomi. Like after this, Pablo does data science, so he would tell you. The thing though is, I mean, I don't believe that people should tell you. I mean, people can offer guidance, and guidance is very useful. But I don't believe that people should tell you what to and what not to learn. Let your interest and the problems that you have before you guide you. So I would say that depending on what problem you're solving, and maybe look at it from that perspective, like look for a problem you're trying to tackle with what you're trying to learn, and then learn just enough to solve that problem, and then pick another problem and sort of learn. Yeah. So that's what I'd say. Yeah.
Mine is kind of in relation to what you asked earlier. So I feel, for context, two things actually really interested in the IT world, because for a very long time I told myself like, this is not for me. Very, very smart problem. I used to go to watching play with Adrian. So I was like, wow, this is so cool. Or what you're writing here, I don't understand it. I was like, maybe one day. Like, very easy. And then I think in 2019 I was in business school. I took a course in business school and we were supposed to teach our businesses at the end of the course. And I remember you were one of the people at the panel and you asked me this and you were like, this is my business thing. How is it different from lawyers in marketing area and all the place?
I asked you that.
Yeah, you did. I'll never forget that. So I went there trying to teach the business. All I was like, I got this in the bag, you know. And then you asked that question and I couldn't answer it.
I'm sorry.
No. I'm grateful you asked that question because I would have gone forward with it knowing that it was flawed. But that question actually opened my eyes to how to make it better for the different brick and mortar law solutions we have right now. So I said, okay, I'm going to find a way to make this law thing I'm doing better and everything. And then I came here, you know, I've met wonderful people that have, you know, opened my eyes. Like you said, Pablo is trying to make me a data science person, and I think I'm going to go there. But again, the question here, sorry for the long story in this context. The question here is, as she has asked, a lot of other professionals in other fields that are not related to the IT world kind of find it hard to get into the IT world. And one of the reasons I feel you've mentioned in your talk is that a lot of IT people are not kind of receptive. You don't have the emotional intelligence to kind of connect with other people.
Go ahead.
Well, I feel the question here lies that has Colab done in the past, or are they doing right now, or is there any move in the future to kind of have like this scheme whereby professionals from other fields that are not, you know, equipped to come, you know, I feel everybody's different. You cannot just come and some of us have been trained to talk anywhere we can talk and just walk into anywhere and ask questions. Other people are not that flexible to a certain extent. So it's like this, you know, like you know, the way you advertise the future of work and it's interesting, everybody, a lot of IT people and then some very, very few people. It's like maybe like IT for professionals, something like that. know how to do patching. But then, whenever you find IT people that will talk to people that have no background whatsoever in tech, and just get them interested to get in there. You've done a lot, as you said, you just want to spark the attention to get you in the door so that you do the rest for yourself. But, and I've asked this question every time I've come here, is there anything, being a top person in Colab, is there anything, or maybe a day whereby you be like, okay, professionals just come, just other humanities, arts, and even the people that have not gone to school, just come. Let's introduce you to tech. So that once we spark that interest in you, you do the rest for us. And if you want to stay, some people will stay, some people will go, and it's totally fine. But has there been that move before? Is it happening right now, or are there plans for it in the future?
Okay. So, I mean, you said a lot, and the parts I can really remember are the last bit. So the part I was talking about, I didn't. If it came across that way, I didn't mean that tech people weren't well socially adjusted. What I meant was most of the people that I meet today, particularly young people, aren't. So it's not a tech thing. It's just like, and I think it's because of the way we live today. That said, I mean, what you're saying would, to be honest, if I wanted to do it, or if you wanted to do it as Colab, and they can, I'm not the boss of these things, at least anymore, would make a lot of money for us. But I'm not particularly sure to be very helpful to the person, right? Because the fundamental thing that makes you think, or makes anyone think that they need like a special class to catch up, is the idea that they even need that class at all. I'm a microbiologist. I have never in my life sat in any training that has to do with tech. I have never. I had access to a computer when I was 9 years old, and the computer had internet, and everything I know today is from that computer. Nobody in my house studied tech or did anything tech related, right? So it's again, like I say, we learn in a certain way that makes us feel like, do you think, and you know, again, it's what I was saying about breaking the culture. Do you think in your heart of hearts that any lecturer you've met knows way more than what's on YouTube or the articles that you can Google? They don't. Like, and I had very good lecturers, but I think I can just think about two who, I mean, the bulk of what they taught us was from their life's work, not stuff that they read somewhere else. It was stuff they had done, and then they were teaching us from the lessons they learned. So they were teaching us stuff that you would not find in any textbook, because it was stuff that they did, like across many countries. So he would tell you, when I was here, this is how we eradicated malaria in Australia, this is how we did this. Like, he would tell you from his own life's work. I believe I only had 2 lecturers like that in school. Everyone else was, you know, reading a textbook or explaining a textbook to us, all right? But because we're socialized to think that way, I mean, if you think about it, as a child, before you went to school, how were you learning? You were observing, experimenting, exploring. I'm not convinced that you're supposed to lose that as you grow. By stuff that, you know, is either beating out of us or, you know, punished out of us, or, you know, society just finds ways to waste your time so you can't do it, or makes it all rewarding. But I think that is sort of like the core. And then where like the rest of the people come into play is that they give you that sense of belonging. You don't feel like, I mean, if you're learning this thing, if you're trying to pick this thing up on your own at home, sometimes it can feel like it's lonely, and, you know, there's no support, and, you know, what is this thing I'm even doing? But if you sit down in a space like this, and, you know, you can see that the person to your left is learning something like you are, and maybe the person to your right has learned it and is working, is in the industry now. So you can see the path just beside you. It sort of motivates you. there is absolutely nothing, as far as I'm concerned, even in the world, to be honest, that requires you to be tutored, except that thing is something that is new, and new to the point that you're learning from the person or the people who taught about it, who did it first, right? If it's in a textbook, if it's in a video, you can learn it. And it's one of the deliberate reasons why we try to keep everything that we do, like if you look through all our courses, except maybe the full stack one, even the full stack one, it's an introduction. Because we're firmly of the belief that what it takes beyond learning the fundamentals is on you. Right? It's on you. So, I mean, we could do that career thing. You know, people that work have money, so we just tell them, bring money, sit you down, give you pep talks. Oh, you know, this how to do this how to do that, and you know, and everybody's happy at the end of the day. I have one certificate, I can do tech, you know. But it really doesn't help, in my opinion. I mean, I may be wrong, but you know, that's sort of like the way we think about these things. I think that if you want to learn, roll your sleeves up, get your hands dirty, and then sit around that support, because it's long in the beginning. It's hard. I won't lie to you. It's difficult, and it's difficult because what fundamentally has to change is not what you're learning, is the way you're thinking about it. It's the way you think about learning that has to change. I mean, we go to school where you must cram things. You have to. If you write code, you Google. Like anybody that says he doesn't Google is a lie. Even the people at Google, they Google code. Like it's like, I mean, it's like having an open book test, because the problem you're solving is not the code you're writing. The code is a means, not an end. Right? Which is why, I mean, for people who learn like software, I always tell them, don't get so stuck in one language to feel like that it becomes a hammer for you. So there's this problem, Node.js. This other problem, Node.js. No. Learn other things. Learn Python. Learn the fundamentals. Sort of like apply across board. So like what's so? Learn other things so that when you see a new problem, the first thing in your head is not what do I know, is how do I best solve this problem. Right? So again, summary, I mean, I think that I know for a very long time, people that worked in tech, particularly in Nigeria, tried to make it seem like it was magic so they could collect plenty money. I think technology is accessible to anyone. And I mean, we talk about pounding to use technology. Like it's not, we think about it as one, language. It's not just coding languages. There are a lot of things. I mean, there are a lot of non-technical careers in tech even. Right? So I don't think it's helpful, but I mean, if my Oga say we should do it, we'll do it. Right? And you people are my Oga, so if you say we should do it, we'll do it. Yeah. Any other questions? Let me read some from online, if there are any. I know I saw one on Twitter. Okay, so someone asked, there's so much knowledge available now, and there's tons of skills to learn. How does one strike a balance between skill improvement and learning too much invaluable information? I mean, short answer to that is I do not think that any information is invaluable. I mean, the information might not necessarily directly lead you to something productive, but I don't think that it's invaluable. Where the danger typically is if you dwell so much on stuff that is not productive, but you let it take all your time and never find a way to use whatever you're learning in those things to be productive. That's where the problem is. But there's no, I mean, I have a friend who, I mean, was one of the people that was around me, I want to say, when I was getting into technology. And this guy is, again, he might be watching this, so I won't say anything bad about him. But this guy is like a walking encyclopedia about a lot of things. Like a lot of things. And some of them very, very mundane and esoteric. Like he can tell you about several histories of, say, the DC lineage. Yeah. The DC superhero lineage, or all the multiverses, and how, like, you can tell, he doesn't need to Google, like, you just talk, he'll tell you. But I think that knowledge, or I mean the time and effort he's taking to study like a lot of these things also show in his day-to-day job, and they also show in the way he approaches problems, right? So I personally don't think like any information is useless. I think it's the application of it that would matter in the long run. So yeah, that was one question online. There are a bunch of others which I can't. The question about striking balance. So I mean, yeah. So I mean, the balance part is up to you. What are you trying to do, and then optimize for that thing. Like don't follow what everyone else is doing. Somebody asked, is collaboration a good idea when it comes to business development? I'm not sure that's what I'm talking about, but I personally think collaboration is almost always good. So yes, collaboration is good. Does Colab do partnerships? Yes, we do. Depending on what it is, though, right? It's not a blank check, but we're open to partnerships. I think that has covered like most of the questions. If there are no other questions, is there any other one so we can wrap this up? No? Okay. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the fact that you were here and all the boring stuff I was saying. Like I said at the beginning, I hope that this at least removes you away from that hamster wheel long enough to think about like all the other things that are happening in the world and how you fit into it, right? At the beginning I said I had two stories, and I was going to share one, but I'll just share a little bit of the second one. I studied microbiology in university, and I mean, typically when you say that, people think I was trying to study medicine and I missed it and I went to microbiology. But I went to a school that didn't even have medicine, and that was sort of like my first choice, right? So microbiology was the thing that I really wanted to do. I was super interested in it. And one of the people that I talked about earlier that I said taught us stuff with his life work, was also one of the most, I learned a lot from him in passing, because in retrospect he was one of my favorite lecturers. At the time I thought he was strict and unnecessarily a pain in the butt. He might watch this as well, but so I won't call his name, but he would know. Anyways, so he did a lot of things, at least with people in my class. Some of them not necessarily for me, but I mean, during ASU strikes, his first lecture, he made everybody right there. His attendance had an email section. So he got it back and saw that a lot of emails were not filled, and he told everyone that you had to have emails, right? And during ASU strikes, he'd send us like notes, and 2 questions from the exam, 2 out of 6 questions were from his ASU strike notes, like as a constant. And he engaged us, like he was one of the few people who used his, if you did sciences, you'd have like lab periods that are like 3 hours, and then you have like lecture periods that are shorter, right? and most other lecturers would skip their short periods and come for the 3 hours to give you notes. But the guy spent every single lab as a lab. And sometimes the lab wasn't even functioning, like the thing he wanted to teach us, but he would print like, manuals, and we'll go to the lab, we'll all wear our lab coats, and he'll show us like, if this thing was working, this is what it would look like. Like, he took his time to do that. But there were two fundamental things, like all of that obviously had like the effect, but there are two fundamental things that he said or did that changed the way that I thought about like microbiology in particular, but also about life. The first thing was the very first lecture. He came to class, opened his briefcase, and shared out a handout. He didn't do handouts, so he always photocopied for everyone. My class is small, we're like 18. So he photocopied stuff, and I still have that thing, and I mean, I should have brought it. Well, I have it in a box somewhere, and it was this scholarship opportunities and jobs you can do as a student, and universities that were located in student-friendly communities and all. That was what his handout was. And his very first lecture, the very first thing he said is, you guys are doing science, but in Nigeria we don't train scientists, we train politicians. You learn how to socialize, you learn how to talk, you learn how to copy. If you really want to learn science, if you have to get in a crate to go and learn it, then that's what you need to do. But I want to tell you up front that you're not learning science. And it made me, the honesty of that statement and the fact that he went through what he did, to show us like what the path was, changed a lot of things. The second thing that he said, and this was much later in our conversation, was, and I can remember it almost verbatim. He said something like, I did not wake up this morning, drive my car to the school, and come and stand in front of you to train microbiologists that would feed old people shit. A lab attendant is supposed to do that. And what that did for me was realize that a lot of the work that exists on this planet is actually mental, not physical. And it made me always try to fall on the side of mental work and not messing with people's proverbial shit. Anyways, with that, if you watch Top Gear, guys, is on that bombshell, I want to end this. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this was useful. Should we do more of this type of, more? Yeah. Okay, so we'll do more. Thank you guys. Enjoy. There's a meetup happening in like 20 minutes around AR. If you're interested. Are you guys ready to go live? Do you want to go live? Nah. Okay. All right. So thank you. My part is done. I forgot to say we should record it.